Hey guys, in this video, we're actually going to start building out our managed users where we'll be retrieving all of the active users, one, allowing the user to add, or at least an admin user to be able to add, deactivate, or reset the password of another user. And so the first thing that we want to look at, however, are code changes that I made between the previous lesson and this one. So one, I modified my login logic, the query that is checking for our user. I added the constraint that the q.isActive must be true. So firstly, we were looking for in the database, get all the users with get the first user from the users table that has a matching username, password in the database that matches our hashed version of whatever was entered. And then I added a third constraint where I said, and the active flag must be equivalent to true. So you would remember that we added an isActive flag that we set to Boolean in the previous video, and so that must be true. So the same logic applies. All three of these must match, and if it doesn't, then we say please provide valid credentials, right? You can be more specific than that. I mean, you can probably get into the details as to why it was, but like I said, the more generic the better for malicious attempts on your system. And then I modified our code in the else, so you can take a look at this code where instead of doing all the processing to find the role name like we did initially and then passing just the role name over, I'm actually just passing the entire user object over to the main window. So I say var main window is equal to main window, and I'm passing this comma user. So when the user is retrieved, I want to pass that entire object over to the main window. Now this will give me more flexibility because, and I'm just going to bring over main window. Now I can use this user object to access any data about the user that I wanted, including the role. So initially we would have used it to access the role information and then passed only the role information. This time I'm just passing all of the user information, and then on a case by case basis, we can access the user information if we want. So I introduced a new property inside of the main window, and I said public user underscore user. This one is underscore role name, and you can see some of them are uppercase, some of them are lowercase. I need to be more consistent. So let me change role name to common case R, so everything looks a bit more consistent. And then inside of the constructor, I'm initializing, I have my login object, I have my user object, and I'm still just going to set the role name separately because I don't want to repeat this bit of code every time I want the role name, right? Now, this bit of code that I just highlighted, I condensed it even further. So the last time what we did was we got the user roles, then we got the first or default, and then we had another variable where we got the role dot short name from the first or default. In this case, I did it all at once. So I'm just showing you how there are so many ways to write your queries in LINQ that as long as it works, it's good. And LINQ is kind of designed to be as efficient as it can. So even if you write it this way or another way, it's almost going to be the same runtime. So, efficiency aside, there are so many ways you can write your queries. So in this situation, I'm saying that the role name is equal to my user object, which still has the list of user roles like we determined. And then I'm saying, give me the first or default one. Now, once you do a first or default, it is going to bring back only one instance of an object, one result. Once I have one result, I can say dot and then call the associated table. So this would be like my inner join, and then call the property I want. So all it's saying is get me the first or default user roles record for the user, then look at the role and get me the details of that role. Same bit of code that we wrote, except we split it in 2 lines last time. I'm doing it in 1 line here. So, if one way works for you better, you can read the other one better. That's fine. You can always just copy it over and reproduce it. That's no problem. As long as it works, it's good. Now, everything else remains the same. And like I said in this video, we're going to focus on our manage users screen. So we already kind of put in some groundwork on this form. We have manage users, we have the refresh, we have the grid. And I don't think I renamed the grid. So let me just go over and rename it quickly. This should be GV user list. All right. So GV user list. And then we have our different buttons, one to add a new user, one to reset a user's password, and one to deactivate the user. So let me just go over to the code file for manage users, and I need to initialize something that will allow us to connect to the database. By now, we should all be familiar with the fact that we need our private object or private property, of type currental entities underscore DB. And then we initialize that inside of our constructor. And then we have our three functions. So I'm going to deal with the easiest ones, the easy ones first. And for me, the easy ones would be the reset password and the deactivate, because I don't have to do much design work as opposed to, when compared to the BTN add user click, because then I have to design a whole form. These are simple queries. So the simple query would be that when the person selects a user from the list, then they would be able to click reset password, and then I'm just going to generate a generic or have a generic password that is going to get hashed, replace their existing password in the database, and then that is what they're expected to type in when it is that they're logging in. All right. So I'm going to put in the reset password functionality, and like I did last time, I'm just going to borrow some code from one of the existing manage screens, right? So in the manage vehicle listing, what I had done was I said that for B10 edit car, whatever it is that was selected, the selected row, that is the one I want to retrieve and then do my operation. So I'm just going to literally copy all of this because it's there already. We wrote it, it's ours, so we can reuse it at will. So I'm going to say BTN reset password click. I want to retrieve from user list, GV user list, right? So we haven't done anything to populate GV user list just yet, but GV user list, get the selected row, and the cell should be ID. And let me just go back to my database and make sure that it is capital ID, which it is not. It is common ID. So there again, I'm being very inconsistent, and that's not good. But, it's good that we see these things and common mistakes. So you want to be consistent in your cases, in a database and in your code. All right. So we're getting the value associated with the selected row. And then I'm looking inside of the users table, not the type of cars table. So users table, q.id being equivalent to the ID that was selected. And then I'm not about to launch any screen or new window, so I can remove all of this. And then what I will say is that var password or var new underscore password is equal to, and then I can put in a generic one. So you can probably auto-generate something based on the details. I know some people, what they would do is auto-generate a password based on the user details, but user details would usually be like first name, last name, date of birth, and such. I didn't collect those details. I'm not storing those details about my users. If you are, though, you can use that to your advantage, right? But then for my simple example, all I have is username and password. So I'm just going to put in something that says, I'm just going to put in a generic password. So your new password would be password @123. All right, so you'd communicate with your user that you reset the password, their new password is that, and then you could build in functionality that once they put in that generic password, they have to change their password. All right, so their new password is password123. Then we want to hash it. So we're using the SHA-256 algorithm. If you look back in the login.cs file, you see SHA-256 and you see all of the code that we need to hash. So I'm actually just going to copy and paste a lot of this. And then you see that this now, once it's repeating itself and it's repeating itself across multiple forms, we could probably create one function that is called that does this job. So I'm actually just going to do that right now. So inside of my Solution Explorer, I have a file called utils, right? And then in this form, in this class, what I had done was I created a utility for the form is open. So I'm going to do another one where I'm going to say public static, and this is going to return, let's say, a string, and then it's going to return hash. It's going to be called hash password. All right. And then it's going to accept a string of, well, a parameter of type string, and we're calling it password. All right. So inside of this function now, we're going to start doing all of that stuff with the SHA-256. So I put the code in there, and then I have to include my references. So including the reference, and then I'm going to just take all of the code that we used in the login. So all of this where we're doing the string builder and building it up. All right, so I'm going to just cut all of this because I don't want it in login anymore. So this is part of refactoring, right? When you realize that code is repeating itself, and then if you have to modify it one place, you have 10 other places, you just do it one place and reuse it, right? So we have our SHA-256 object, we do our bytes, we rebuild our string, and then the last thing that we did was to say sbuilder.toString. So what I'll do is take this line, and then I'll say return. So our function is going to return the string builder.toString. So this is the final value that would have been assigned to the hashed password. So after getting a password value through the parameter, we go through all of that, and then we return the rebuilt string. So that means anybody who wants this hashed password will have to make a function call where they say the hashed password. So just to modify this login function, I'll say hashed password is equal to utils dot hash password. And then this is expecting some string, and I'm going to pass in the password that we want hashed. All right, so that looks much cleaner. You see, just one line of code to get the hashed password. All right, and then just the same way we did that in the login, we just did that in the login. We had no business doing that in the login. I'm just doing it one time because I'm about to do it again. And let me just save utils. I'm about to do it again inside of manage users. So my new password is going to be equal to, and I'll just cut this. So instead of, let me just say var generic password is equal to that string, right? So I like to give my values variable names. I don't like to have random values anywhere, because then if somebody stumbled upon password @123, they would be wondering what in the world that is, right? So I just put it in a variable. And then I'm going to say new password, or I could just say hashed password right here, is going to be equal to utils dot, and then hash password. And then I'm going to pass in my generic password as the password I would like to get hashed. There you go. So we don't have to repeat all those lines of code every time we want to hash a password. We just wrote a function inside of a static class that's just going to take a value and then give us back a hashed password. All right. So that is how we hash. So you see, if we wanted to introduce what we call a salt, then we could have just introduced it inside of the utils, because then everything is happening here anyway. So we could just say add a salt to the password and then do the hashing. And then, so we'd know one salt. If we wanted to change a salt, we'll change it one place. Not that changing a salt is recommended anyway, but that's the point of having all of your code as centralized as possible. All right, so now that we've calculated, so we got the user, right, presumably, and let me just change this object name. So it's user, var user. All right, so we retrieve the user, and then we got the password, we hash the password, and then I'm just going to say user dot password. Right, so remember that we retrieved the user from the database, right? And then we, set the generic password, we hashed the generic password. So now I'm saying that this user from the database, your new password value is going to be equal to whatever came back from our function and got stored in our variable hashed password. Then I can just say _db.save changes, because then it's already tracking that I just got this user back from the database. I changed a property in this user from the database. So just save the changes, right? And that's our button reset. And then at the end of that, you probably want to give a message box to say that password has been reset. So you could even be a bit more explicit. You could let them know that, and I'll just use some interpolation here, user dot username. All right, so I'm going to say which username, and then apostrophe S just to be, punctuation and grammatically correct. So user dot username's password has been reset. All right. And that's it. So we just did a password reset, a nice, simple, quick and dirty password reset. Of course, like I said, for the password, I use that generic password, but then in practical terms, you probably want to generate this on the fly and then let the person know the pattern. So that's part of security. You would never want to tell the person that your new password is password at 123, because then anybody can go in that person's account once that password has been set, if this is the password that's been used for every single person. So security wise, you would want to tell them that it's the first 4 letters of the first name, the last 2 letters of the last name, and the date of birth, something that only they should be able to sit down and figure out easily, and probably be a bit more difficult for somebody else to figure out. All right. So that's a nice, quick and dirty way of doing the reset password function. Now, a similar thing would be for the deactivate user. So I'm just going to take this try catch. All right. And we're just going to modify the code a little. So once again, we retrieve the person who was selected. Then we retrieve them from the database, but then we don't need any hashing of anything. All right. What I am going to change, however, is their isActive state. So I'm going to say user.isActive is equal to false. All right. As a matter of fact, well, this is deactivate. So I should probably put in functionality to say that, if that same button is clicked, then it would be activate or deactivate. So I would have to change the queuing or the representation of the text on this button. So what I'll do is say, I'll change the text to say deactivate/activate user, right? So then the person who would be clicking this button would know that this is a button that will deactivate the person or reactivate them. So if they're active, deactivate, and vice versa. Then the code that we would write is that on button click and we retrieve the user. All right. Then we're going to say something like, and I'm just going to use a ternary operator here. So I'll say user dot isActive is equal to, and then the ternary operator now would allow me to state a condition. So I'm going to say user dot isActive. And I have to specify the condition is equivalent to true. Now, if isActive was not nullable, so if you hover over it, you see a bool with a question mark. That's because we allowed nulls in the database, and so it is nullable in C#. If it was not nullable and it was just a straight Boolean, I could just say isActive and then say is true or false here, right? What happens if it's true? What happens if it's false? But because it's nullable, we introduced a third state where it could be null. It could be true, false, or null, right? So because of that, I have to specify is equivalent to true. So we're saying if the user is active, if we looked up the user in the database and we find that they are active, if isActive is true, then we want to set it to false. Otherwise, set it to true, right? So it would just be like an if statement. If isActive is true, then isActive should equal to false. Else isActive should equal to true, right? That's basically what we did in this one line. All right. So I could add a comment here to say this is what it would look like as an if else. All right. So that's what it would look like. If the user is active and that's equivalent to true, then we set it to false, else we set it to true. So that's what this one line does. So when the person or the user clicks deactivate user, it gets the row that was selected, and then it gets the user associated with the ID of the row that was selected, and then we say the user is active, is relative to whether it was true or false. Then we save the changes, and then we say username or has been, or activity status has changed. Active status has changed, right? So I'm just leaving it generic here because the thing is, I would have to probably put in an if statement to say whether it is true or false at the end of that, if it was activated or deactivated. So I'll just leave it, try and keep it simple, and just say, you know, the active status has changed. All right. So right there, we would have done two very major operations, and we would have done it with, you know, much simplicity, quick and dirty at some points, but I did explain why and how you could enhance it for yourself. And so that's it for this lesson. Next time we come along, we will be populating our grid and then focusing on adding users to our application.